of a crown colony. Subsequent charters for the Maryland colony in 1632 and to the 8 Lords Proprietors of the province of Carolina in 1663 and 1665 further reduced the Virginia colony to roughly the coastal borders it held until the American Revolution. The border with North Carolina was disputed until surveyed by William Byrd II in 1728. Third Anglo-Powhatan War, 1644–1646, edit. After 12 years of peace following the Indian Wars of 1622–1632, another Anglo-Powhatan War began on the 18th of March, 1644, as a last effort by the remnants of the Powhatan Confederacy, still under Opechancanough, to dislodge the English settlers of the Virginia colony. Around 500 colonists were killed, but that number represented a relatively low percentage of the overall population, as opposed to the earlier massacre. The 1622 attack had wiped out a third, that of 1644 barely a tenth. This was followed by an effort by the settlers to decimate the Powhatan. In July, they marched against the Pamunkey, Chickahominy, and Powhatan proper, and south of the James, against the Appomattox, Wenoke, Warrascoic, and Nansemond, as well as 2 Carolina tribes, the Chowanoke and Seckerton. In February–March 1645, the colony ordered the construction of 4 frontier forts: Fort Charles at the Falls of the James, Fort James on the Chickahominy, Fort Royal at the Falls of the York, and Fort Henry at the Falls of the Appomattox, where the modern city of Petersburg is located. In August 1645, the forces of Governor William Barclay stormed Opechancanoug's stronghold. All captured males in the village over age 11 were deported to Tangier Island. Opechancanough, variously reported to be 92 to 100 years old, was taken to Jamestown. While a prisoner, Opechancanough was shot in the back and killed by a soldier assigned to guard him. His death disintegrated the Powhatan Confederacy into its component tribes, whom the colonists continued to attack. Treaty of 1646, edit. In the Peace Treaty of October 1646, the Weroans, Nekotoans, and the sub-tribes formerly in the Confederacy each became tributaries to the King of England. At the same time, a racial frontier was delineated between Indian and English settlements, with members of each group forbidden to cross to the other side except by a special pass obtained at one of the newly erected border forts. The extent of the Virginia colony open to patent by English colonists was defined as all the land between the Blackwater and York rivers, and up to the navigable point of each of the major rivers, which were connected by a straight line running directly from modern Franklin on the Blackwater, northwesterly to the Appomattox village beside Fort Henry, and continuing in the same direction to the Monocan village above the Falls of the James, where Fort Charles was built, then turning sharp right to Fort Royal on the York, Pamunkey, River. Nekotoans thus ceded the English vast tracts of still uncolonized land, much of it between the James and Blackwater. English settlements on the peninsula north of the York and below the Powhatan were also allowed, as they had already been there since 1640. English Civil War and Commonwealth, 1642–1660, edit. See also, Virginia Cavaliers, Historical, and English Overseas Possessions in the Wars of the Three Kingdoms. While the newer Puritan colonies, most notably Massachusetts, were dominated by parliamentarians, the older colonies sided with the Crown. The Virginia Company's 2 settlements, Virginia and Bermuda, Bermuda's Puritans were expelled as the Lutheran adventurers, settling the Bahamas under William's sail. Antigua and Barbados were conspicuous in their loyalty to the Crown and were singled out by the Rump Parliament in an act for prohibiting trade with the Barbados, Virginia, Bermuda and Antigua in October 1650. This dictated that d. ue punishment be inflicted upon the said delinquents, do s. declare all and every the said persons in Barbados, Antigua, Bermudas and Virginia, that have contrived, abetted, aided or assisted those horrid rebellions, or have since willingly joined with them, to be notorious robbers and traitors, and such as by the law of nations are not to be permitted any manner of commerce or traffic with any people whatsoever, and do s. forbid to all manner of persons, foreigners, and others, all manner of commerce, traffic and correspondency whatsoever, to be used or held with the said rebels in the Barbados, Bermudas, Virginia and Antigua, or either of them. The act authorized parliamentary privateers to act against English vessels trading with the rebellious colonies. All ships that trade with the rebels may be surprised. Goods and tackle of such ships not to be embezzled, till judgment in the Admiralty, 2 or 3 of the officers of every ship to be examined upon oath. Virginia's population swelled with cavaliers during and after the English Civil War. Under the tenure of Crown Governor William Berkeley, 1642, 1652, 1660, 1677, the population expanded from 8,000 in 1642 to 40,000 in 1677. Despite the resistance of the Virginia Cavaliers, Virginian Puritan Richard Bennett was made governor answering to Oliver Cromwell in 1652, followed by 2 more nominal Commonwealth governors. Nonetheless, the colony was rewarded for its loyalty to the Crown by Charles II following the Stuart Restoration when he dubbed it the Old Dominion. With the restoration in the English colonies in 1660, the governorship returned to Berkeley. In 1676, Bacon's rebellion challenged the political order of the colony. While a military failure, its handling resulted in Governor Berkeley being recalled to England. In 1679, the Treaty of Middle Plantation was signed between King Charles II and several Native American groups. Williamsburg era, edit. Further information, James Blair, Virginia, Alexander Spotswood, Sir William Gooch, 1st Baronet, Robert Dinwiddie, and Francis Fauquier. Virginia was the most prominent, wealthiest, and most influential of the American colonies, where conservatives controlled the colonial and local governments. At the local level, Church of England parishes handled many local affairs, and they, in turn, were controlled not by the minister but rather by a closed circle of wealthy landowners who comprised the parish vestry. Ronald L. Heinemann emphasizes the ideological conservatism of Virginia while noting some religious dissenters were gaining strength by the 1760s. The tobacco planters and farmers of Virginia adhered to the concept of a hierarchical society that they or their ancestors had brought with them from England. Most held to the general idea of a great chain of being. At the top were God and his heavenly host, next came kings, who were divinely sanctioned to rule, then an hereditary aristocracy who were followed in descending order by wealthy landed gentry, small, independent farmers, tenant farmers, servants. Aspirations to rise above one's station in life were considered a sin. In actual practice, colonial Virginia never had a bishop to represent God nor a hereditary aristocracy with titles like duke or baron. However, it had a royal governor appointed by the king and a powerful landed gentry. The status quo was strongly reinforced by what Thomas Jefferson called feudal and unnatural distinctions that were vital to the maintenance of aristocracy in Virginia. He promoted laws such as entail and primogeniture by which the oldest son inherited all the land. As a result, increasingly large plantations, worked by white tenant farmers and by enslaved black people, gained in size, wealth, and political power in the eastern, tidewater, tobacco areas. Maryland and South Carolina had similar hierarchical systems, as did New York and Pennsylvania. During the American Revolutionary era, all such laws were repealed by the new states. The most fervent loyalists left for Canada or Britain or other parts of the British Empire. They introduced primogeniture in Upper Canada in 1792, lasting until 1851. Such laws lasted in England until 1926. Relations with natives, edit. As the English expanded out from Jamestown, encroachment of the new arrivals and their ever-growing numbers on what had been Indian lands resulted in several conflicts with the Virginia Indians. For much of the 17th century, English contact and conflict were mainly with the Algonquian peoples that populated the coastal regions, primarily the Powhatan Confederacy. Following a series of wars and the decline of the Powhatan as a political entity, the colonists expanded westward in the late 17th and 18th centuries, encountering the Shawnee, Iroquoian-speaking peoples such as the Nottoway, Mehurin, Iroquois and Cherokee, as well as Shawan-speaking peoples such as the Tutelo, Saponi, and Occaneechi. Iroquois Confederacy, edit. As the English settlements expanded beyond the tidewater territory traditionally occupied by the Powhatan, they encountered new groups with which there had been minimal relations with the colony. In the late 17th century, the Iroquois Confederacy expanded into the western region of Virginia as part of the Beaver Wars. They arrived shortly before the English settlers and displaced the resident Shawan tribes. Lieutenant Governor Alexander Spotswood made further advances in policy with the Virginia Indians along the frontier. In 1714, he established Fort Christiana to help educate and trade with several tribes with which the colony had friendly relations and to help protect them from hostile tribes. In 1722, the Treaty of Albany was signed by leaders of the Five Nations of Iroquois, Province of New York, Colony of Virginia, and Province of Pennsylvania. Geography, edit. See also, Environment of Virginia. The geography of the Virginia settlement expanded as the boundaries of European colonization extended over time. Its cultural geography gradually evolved, with various settlement and jurisdiction models employed. By the late 17th century and the early 18th century, the primary settlement pattern was based on plantations, to grow tobacco, farms, and some towns, mostly ports or courthouse villages. Early settlements, edit. The fort at Jamestown, founded in 1607, remained the primary settlement of the colonists for several years. A few strategic outposts were constructed, including Fort Algernon, 1609, at the entrance to the James River. Early attempts to occupy strategic locations already inhabited by natives at what is now Richmond and Suffolk failed owing to native resistance. A short distance farther up the James, in 1611, Thomas Dale began the construction of a progressive development at Henricus on and about what was later known as Ferrers Island. Henricus was envisioned as a possible replacement capital for Jamestown and was to have the first college in Virginia. The ill-fated Henricus was destroyed during the Indian Massacre of 1622. In addition to creating the settlement at Henricus, Dale also established the port town of Bermuda Hundred, as well as Bermuda City in 1613, now part of Hopewell, Virginia. He began the excavation work at Dutch Gap, using methods he had learned while serving in Holland. Hundreds, edit. Once tobacco had been established as an export cash crop, investors became more interested, and groups of them united to create largely self-sufficient hundreds. The term hundred is a traditional English name for an administrative division of a shire, or county, to define an area that would support 100 heads of household. In the colonial era in Virginia, the hundreds were large developments of many acres, necessary to support tobacco crops. The hundreds were required to be at least several miles from any existing community. Soon, these patented tracts of land sprang up along the rivers. The investors sent shiploads of settlers and supplies to Virginia to establish the new developments. The administrative centers of Virginia's hundreds were essentially small towns or villages and were often palisaded for defense. An example was Martin's Hundred, located downstream from Jamestown on the north bank of the James River. The Martin's Hundred Society, a group of investors in London, sponsored it. It was settled in 1618, and Wolstenholme town was its administrative center, named for John Wolstenholme, one of the investors. Bermuda Hundred, now in Chesterfield County, and Flowerdew Hundred, now in Prince George County, are other names which have survived over centuries. Others included Berkeley Hundred, Bermuda Nether Hundred, Bermuda Upper Hundred, Smith's Hundred, Diggs Hundred, West Hundred, and Shirley Hundred, and, in Bermuda, Harrington Hundreds. Including the creation of the hundreds, the various incentives to investors in the Virginia colony finally paid off by 1617. By this time, the colonists were exporting 50,000 pounds of tobacco to England per year and were beginning to generate enough profit to ensure the economic survival of the colony. Cities, shires, and counties, edit. Main articles, Shires of Virginia and Counties of Virginia. In 1619, the plantations and developments were divided into 4 incorporations or cities, as they were called. These were Charles City, Elizabeth City, Henrico City, and James City, which included the relatively small seat of government for the colony at Jamestown Island. Each of the 4 cities, extended across the James River, the main conduit of transportation of the era. Elizabeth City, known initially as Kecoughtan, a native word with many variations in spelling by the English, also included the areas now known as Southampton Roads and the Eastern Shore. In 1634, a local government system was created in the Virginia colony by order of the King of England. 8 shires were designated, each with local officers. Within a few years, the shires were renamed counties, a system that has remained to the present day. Later settlements, edit. In 1630, under the governorship of John Harvey, the first settlement on the York River was founded. In 1632, the Virginia legislature voted to build a fort to link Jamestown and the York River settlement of Chiskiack and protect the colony from Indian attacks. In 1634, a palisade was built near Middle Plantation. This wall stretched across the peninsula between the York and James rivers and protected the settlements on the eastern side of the lower peninsula from Indians. The wall also served to contain cattle. In 1699, a capital was established and built at Middle Plantation, soon renamed Williamsburg. Northern Neck Proprietary, edit. Main article, Northern Neck Proprietary. In the period following the English Civil War, the exiled King Charles II hoped to shore up the loyalty of several of his supporters by granting them a significant area of mostly uncharted land to control as a proprietary in Virginia, a claim that would only be valid were the king to return to power. While under the jurisdiction of the Virginia colony, the proprietary maintained complete control of the granting of land within that territory, and revenues obtained from it, until after the American Revolution. The grant was for the land between the Rappahannock and Potomac rivers, which included the titular northern neck, but as time went on, also would include all of what is today Northern Virginia and into West Virginia. Due to ambiguities of the text of the various grants causing disputes between the proprietary and the colonial government, the tract was finally demarcated via the Fairfax Line in 1746. Government and Law, edit. Main articles, Virginia Governor's Council and House of Burgesses. See also, List of colonial governors of Virginia. In the initial years under the Virginia Company, the colony was governed by a council, headed by a council president. From 1611 to 1618, under the orders of Sir Thomas Dale, the settlers of the colony were under a regime of civil law that became known as Dale's Code. Under a charter from the company in 1618, a new model of governance was put in place in 1619, which created a House of Burgesses. On the 30th of July, 1619, Burgesses met at Jamestown Church as the first elected representative legislative assembly in the New World. The legal system in the colony was thereafter based on the provisions of its royal charter and English common law. For much of the history of the royal colony, the formally appointed governor was absentee, often remaining in England. In his stead, a series of acting or lieutenant governors who were physically present held actual authority. In the later years of its history, as it became increasingly civilized, more governors made the journey. The first settlement in the colony, Jamestown, served as the capital and main port of entry from its founding until 1699. During this time, a series of state houses, capitals, were used and subsequently consumed by fires, accidental and intentional in the case of Bacon's Rebellion. Following such a fire, in 1699, the capital was relocated inland, away from the swampy clim of Jamestown, to Middle Plantation, renamed Williamsburg. The capital of Virginia remained in Williamsburg until it was moved further inland to Richmond in 1779 during the American Revolution. Economy, edit. See also, Plantation economy and tobacco in the American colonies. The entrepreneurs of the Virginia Company experimented with several means of making the colony profitable. The orders sent with the first colonists instructed that they search for precious metals, specifically gold. While no gold was found, various products were sent back, including pitch and clapboard. In 1608, early attempts were made at breaking the continental hold on glass-making through the creation of a glass works. In 1619, the colonists built the first ironworks in North America. In 1612, settler John Rolfe planted tobacco obtained from Bermuda, during his stay there as part of the third supply. Within a few years, the crop proved extremely lucrative in the European market. As the English increasingly used tobacco products, the production of tobacco in the American colonies became a significant economic driver, especially in the tidewater region surrounding the Chesapeake Bay. From 1616 to 1619, the only exports of the colony were tobacco and sassafras. Colonists developed plantations along the rivers of Virginia, and social forward/economic systems developed to grow and distribute this cash crop. Some elements of this system included the importation and use of enslaved Africans to cultivate and process crops, which included harvesting and drying periods. Planters would have their workers fill large hogsheads with tobacco and convey them to inspection warehouses. In 1730, the Virginia House of Burgesses standardized and improved the quality of tobacco exported by establishing the Tobacco Inspection Act of 1730, which required inspectors to grade tobacco at 40 specified locations. Culture, edit. Population, edit. Ethnic origins, edit. England supplied most colonists. A later migration of Scots-Irish filled the back country. The Virginia colony was always predominantly British in ethnic descent, with only minor contributions from other ethnic groups, particularly Palatinate Germans. In 1608, the first Poles and Slovaks arrived as part of a group of skilled craftsmen. In 1619, the first Africans arrived. Many more Africans were imported as enslaved people, such as Angela. In the early 17th century, French Huguenots arrived in the colony as refugees from religious warfare. In the early 18th century, indentured German-speaking colonists from the iron-working region of Nassau-Siegen arrived to establish the Germana settlement. Scots-Irish settled on the Virginia frontier. Some Welsh arrived, including some ancestors of Thomas Jefferson. Servitude and Slavery, edit. Main article, History of Slavery in Virginia. With the boom in tobacco planting, there was a severe shortage of laborers to work the labor-intensive crop. One method to solve the shortage was using indentured servants. By the 1640s, legal documents started to define indentured servants, changing nature and status as servants. In 1640, John Punch was sentenced to lifetime servitude as punishment for trying to escape from his enslaver, Hugh Gwynn. This is the earliest legal sanctioning of slavery in Virginia. After this trial, the relationship between indentured servants and their masters changed, as planters saw permanent servitude a more appealing and profitable prospect than 7-year indentures. As many indentured workers were illiterate, especially Africans, there were opportunities for abuse by planters and other indenture holders. Some ignored the expiration of servants' indentured contracts and tried to keep them as lifelong workers. One example is with Anthony Johnson, who argued with Robert Parker, another planter, over the status of John Kaser, formerly an indentured servant of his. Johnson argued that his indenture was for life and Parker had interfered with his rights. The court ruled in favor of Johnson and ordered that Kaser be returned to him, where he served the rest of his life as an enslaved person. Such documented cases marked the transformation of black Africans from indentured servants into slaves. In the late 17th century, the Royal African Company, which the King of England established to supply the great demand for labor to the colonies, had a monopoly on providing enslaved Africans to the colony. As plantation agriculture was established earlier in Barbados, in the early years, enslaved people were shipped from Barbados, where they were seasoned, to the colonies of Virginia and Carolina. Religion, edit. Main article, Religion in Early Virginia. In 1619, the Anglican Church was formally established as the official religion in the colony and would remain so until shortly after the American Revolution. Establishment meant that local tax funds paid the parish costs and that the parish had local civic functions such as poor relief. The upper-class planters controlled the vestry, which ran the parish and chose the minister. The church in Virginia was controlled by the Bishop of London, who sent priests and missionaries, but there were never enough, and they reported deficient standards of personal morality. By the 1760s, dissenting Protestants, especially Baptists and Methodists, were proliferating and started challenging the Anglicans for moral leadership. All 26 churches with regular services in Virginia in 1650 were Anglican, which included all but 4 of the 30 Anglican churches in the colonies at the time, with the remainder located in Maryland. Following the First Great Awakening, 1755, the number of regular places of worship in Virginia grew to 126 in 1750, 96 Anglican, 17 Presbyterian, 5 Lutheran, 5 German Reformed, and 3 Baptist. with the colony gaining an additional 251 regular places of worship to a total of 377 by 1776, 101 Baptist, 95 Presbyterian, 94 Episcopal, 42 Friends, 17 Lutheran, 14 German Reformed, 10 Methodism, 2 German Baptist Brethren, and 2 Mennonite. Education and Literacy, edit. The first printing press used in Virginia began operation in Jamestown on the 8th of June, 1680, though within a few years, it was shut down by the Governor and Crown of England for want of a license. It was not until 1736 that the first newspaper, the Virginia Gazette, began circulation under